I will resist that temptation, disappoint you, and say instead that music has always been central to his work. Music, as in the music we'll hear this evening, as Robert reads to us and interacts with his brilliant collaborators, or music as in the unheard music the poet hears when he answers the summons to enter the poem, taking shape within him. Of course, there are many different kinds of music, and of course, not every poet will generate a fully distinctive music. The music of Robert's poetry has always been various, now refined, elegant, even sometimes austere, elsewhere a little brassy, never remotely the enormous wallowing sound as of 50 elephants stirring in their litter that Herman Melville associated with his great whale. But some of the time, strenuous, what Robert himself once called the clutch of contending voices, or the mouth-filling, dense-sounding syllables of a line like, this is from Robert, molecules in an obdurate equilibrium of pressures, unquote. That rich music is not infrequent in Robert, but more insistent is the other music, not reluctant or casual, but spare, a tendency more than a system, where the effects seem more like fine filaments than like massed concentrations of sound. Or, elsewhere, we have a music built from a sudden, mischievous juxtaposition, a sometime swerve from one language to another, as in this, O people of the book, wanderers, under us. It's hard for anyone without the full context of that line to quite imagine how quietly heart-stopping and disquieting the music is there in that glide from the English word wanderers to the German anderes. But then Robert's work has given us a great profusion of moments rich in music and invention. And of course, we might go on, I certainly might go on for a long time in this way, right? But I'm in a sort of a benevolent mood this evening, and I think you want to witness the poetry and take in the several kinds of music, and so I will step never nimbly out of the way and ask you please to welcome our poet who will say a word or two about his colleagues and their recital, Robert Pinsky.
It's a pleasure to be introduced by Bob and to be here at this beloved venue where I know a lot of people here are just excited because they've been thinking about and talking about writing. For me, it's a particular thrill as a one-time would-be musician to work with great musicians. And it's all these words sound kind of hollow, but it is an honor and a privilege to work with the great Pat LaBarbera, saxophone player. It's thanks to the closeness in time to the Jazz Festival and this Writers' Conference that I can work with people like Pat and the amazing bass player, Mr. Todd Coleman. As far as I know, Coleman is his real name. Some people here have heard me read my poems with musicians before. I'm going to try something a little bit different. I've been thinking, thanks to my friends Jim Miller and Robert Polito, who had a kind of it sounds like a funny phrase, a noir festival. But at the New School, they had a noir festival, and the film turned noir, and that sensibility has a connection with jazz music. And inspired by them there, I did I did start thinking about poetry and noir. A lot of films in the 50s in particular had jazz scores. You can see Thelonious Monk in a movie. You can hear all kinds of unexpected music as scores for films. Noir, in my opinion, was invented by the great French poet Charles Baudelaire. In Baudelaire, maybe my limited reading, but to my knowledge, in Baudelaire is the first time you see the decay of this city and the griminess of the city and the mess of the city as suffused with poetry, and it's being romantic. And in the Baudelaire poem I'm thinking of, he sees the years that are where their years are like whores in their faded dresses looking down from the balcony of the clouds. And he says that under the archway, is it a bum falling asleep? Or is it under the archway the last rays of the sun are going down? And the sun is an old bum falling asleep, or a derelict falling asleep in an archway. And the years are whores wearing faded dresses. Or are they the clouds over the city in sunset? And if you've ever looked at smog and thought how smog in a way has beautiful colors, to me that's a part of that we think of noir as black and white. That's part of it. So let's start. And I'm going to want my friends to play very loud at certain parts during this that I'm embarrassed by, but I'll start with this poem of Baudelaire's in my translation. Behave yourself, my little sorrow. Be good. It's time to come down. You wept. You wanted darkness. Here it is. The atmosphere of dusk enfolds the town, bringing rest for some, for others, restlessness. Now, while the common herd of women and men slave away, driven by the heartless whip of the slave master, pleasure. They go and they party on remorse, the treat of slaves again. Come, my sorrow, take my hand, we'll go far off. Come take my hand, while the herd of slaves, driven by the slave master's whip, pleasure, go after their treat again. We'll go elsewhere. Look, up in the sky in their faded colors, the spent years lean from balconies of cloud. A smile has risen from deep in the river, the crescent of regret under an archway the dying sun beds down, and, softly, a silk shroud trailing from the horizon. Listen, dear one, for the quiet steps of night. Now I'm going to need the musicians to keep playing while you hear my voice, because I'm going to need a little camouflage. Sois sage, ô mon douleur, et tiens-toi plus tranquille. Tu réclamais le soir des saints, le voici. L'atmosphère obscure enveloppe la ville, aux importants la paix. Aux importants la paix, aux autres le souci. Pendant que de mortels la multitude vile sous le fouet de plaisir, ce bourreau sans merci va couiller de remords dans la fête civile. Ma douleur, donnez-moi la main. Viens par ici, loin d'eux. Voir se pencher des défunts années sur le balcon du ciel en robe surannée, surgir du fond des eaux, le regret souriant. Se pencher les défunts damnés sur le balcon du ciel en robe surannée, surgir du fond des eaux, le regret souriant. Le soleil moribond s'endormir sous une arche, et comme un long lancire traînant à l'Orient, entends ma chère, entends la douce nuit qui marche. I thank you, Todd Coleman, Pat LaBarbera, thanks you. Charles Baudelaire is no longer living, and the French language looks on with hauteur. I think that the dream life of artists often does not spring from their most accustomed native surroundings, though of course sometimes it does. Robert Frost was mostly a city boy. Until he was, about 11 or 12 years old, he lived in San Francisco. His father was a journalist. Then when his father died, his mother and his sister and he had no choice but to move to Lawrence, Massachusetts, a mill town, where the mother's father-in-law, the father of the dead father, was a kind of administrator, kind of a foreman figure in the mill. And they felt humiliated by being dependent upon that man. And Lawrence, though then prosperous, it was a mill town. It was grimy. It was urban. In the summer and on the weekends, he got to visit his grandparents in New Hampshire, and he milked cows. And he picked blueberries, and he saw country life, which apparently he never was very good at as a farmer. But his dream life involve the escape from Lawrence, and where we think of most of his poems as being. There are amazing Frost poems that do suggest the city, and one of the greatest of them, short but very, very penetrating, I think indelible poem, for me is in the spirit of noir. So I will read the poem, and at some point Pat and Todd will join me, and then we'll do the poem the way you heard us do the Baudelaire. Acquainted with the night. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, a luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. Been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have walked down the saddest city lane. I have walked by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. Stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, a luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have walked down the saddest city street. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came from houses from another street. Far away, an interrupted cry came over houses from another street. But not to call me back. But not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still at an unearthly height, a luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. I'll do one more of these poems, not by me, that seem to me to be in a noir spirit, certainly in a film spirit. And to me, this poem represents a meeting of noir and romantic comedy or romantic music. It really does. The poem is by the 20th century black American poet Sterling Brown. And I believe that Sterling Brown in this poem has in his mind all of those movies set usually in New York, certainly in a city, and there are two lovers. And because the young lovers are so much in love, they're dancing, they're singing, they're smooching, magically the city, which is potentially kind of Baudelairean, it is the city. It has smokestacks, it has trucks, it has sewers. The city becomes idyllic, and ethnic stereotypes beam. And the rich American vocabulary of ethnic stereotypes, those words, I'm sure in a dictionary of slang, under every group you could find about 25, 30 words. The Basques alone. Don't ever say around a Basque, dirty nipplehead. You can say, wear little berets. Brown uses those stereotypes. Very often the couple is dancing, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, or happy in the train station or out in the street. And often the black maid or the black porter grins with happiness just to see the couple. And in this poem, Sterling Brown flips that, and the poem is called Harlem Happiness, and the couple is a black couple, and the ethnic stereotypes magically, and with that ironic sense that this is not necessarily real life, but it might be for one life, it's very complicated interchange between noir, blackness, darkness, love, romance, lightness. And I like the way the poem sort of keeps you off balance with all that, while also having its own kind of grace. And I would like you guys to just play while I'm reading the poem, if possible. Harlem Happiness. I think there's the stuff in this for many lyrics. A Dago fruit stand. A Dago fruit stand at 3 a.m. The wop asleep. His woman knitting a tiny garment, laughing when we approached her, flashing a smile from white teeth, then weighing out the grapes. Grapes large as plums, and tart and sweet as tart and sweet as, well, we know the lady, and purplish red and firm, quite as this lady's lips are. We laughed. We laughed all three when she awoke her swarthy, snoring Pietro to make us change, which we, rich paupers, left her to help the garment. We left her the change to help the garment. We swaggered off. We swaggered off while they two stared and laughed in understanding, and thanked us lovers who brought back an old Etrurian springtide. Then once beyond their light, a step beyond their pearly smiling, we tasted grapes. We tasted grapes and tasted lips and laughed at sleepy Harlem. We laughed at sleepy Harlem, and when the huge Mick Cop stomped by, a swinging of his billy, you nodded to him gaily, and I kissed you with him looking beneath the swinging light that weakly fought against the mist that settled on 8th Avenue and curled around the houses. Huge Mick Cop, swinging of his billy. You nodded to him gaily, and I kissed you at him looking beneath the swinging light that weakly fought against the mist that settled on 8th Avenue and curled around the houses, and he grinned too and understood. He grinned too and understood the wisdom of our madness. That night, at least, the world was ours to spend. Nor were we misers. Morningside with Maytime a-whispering in the foliage. Alone atop the city, the tramps were still in shelter, and moralizing lights that peered up from the murky distance seemed soft as our two cigarette ends, burning slowly, dimly, and careless as the jade stars that winked upon our gladness. And when I flicked my cigarette and we watched it falling, it seemed a shooting meteor that we, most proud creators, sent down in gay capriciousness upon a trivial Harlem. And then I madly quoted lyrics. I quoted lyrics from old kindred masters who wrote of you, unknowing you, for far more lucky me. And you sang broken bits of song, and we both slept in snatches. And so the night sped on, too swift. The night sped on, too swift, with grapes and words and kisses and numberless cigarette ends glowing in the darkness. Old Harlem slept regardless. Old Harlem slept regardless. But a motherly old moon shone down benevolently on two happy, wasteful lovers. It could almost be a creative writing assignment. Write a poem using the words Mick, Dago, and Wop. Set it in Harlem and make it a love poem. And allude indirectly to Shakespeare. We can't do that. I hope you realize that what Todd Coleman and Pat LaBarbera are doing requires not just tremendous expertise and virtuosity, but tremendous taste and ability to listen as well. I hope you understand that these guys are not just playing around. Now, pardon us while we rehearse for a moment. This is one we've been working on for a few months. This is a relatively recent poem of mine that is entitled Horn, and it harks back to the time when I wanted to be able to do, I was deluded to think I would be able to do what Pat does. In my teen years, I was not trying to be a poet, I was trying to be a musician. And this poem is a kind of a love poem. I've already written a love poem to a piano. This is a love poem to a horn. This is the golden trophy, the true addiction. Steel springs, pearl facings, steel springs, pearl facings, fibers and leathers, all mounted on the body, tarnished. All mounted on the body, tarnished from neck to bell. The master, a legend, a righteous addict, pauses while he's walking past the bar to listen, says to his friend, listen what the cat is doing in there. Some figure, some hook, some breathy hunk. some sharp nine or weird rhythm that this one hack journeyman hornman had going. Listen, listen, says the Dante of bop. Listen to what he's working. Listen, says the Dante of bop. Listen to what he's working. Breath. Breath tempered in its chamber by hide pads as desires and demands swarm through the deft axe. Desires and demands swarm through the deft axe in the fixed attention of that one practitioner. His professional calluses and habits from his righteous teachers, his dentist, his optician, a crazed matriarch, hexed architect of his making. A crazed matriarch, hexed architect of his making. And polished and punished by use. The horn. Flawed and severe. It nestles in plush. The hard case contoured to cradle the engraved hook shape of Normandy brass. Keys from seashells in the Mekong. Reed from Belize. Listen, labor, flip all the altered scales in the woodshed. Go crazy some more. Listen, labor, flip all the altered scales in the woodshed. Persist, you practiced addict, you devotee, you slave of Dante, like Dante himself, a slave. Dante, whose name they say is short for Durante. Durante, meaning persistent. Durante, persisting. Listen, listen, you bondsman of the tool. You hunker, toker, toiler, persistent. Listen. That horn player is starting to get quite good. He must have been practicing. Samurai song. When I had no roof, I made audacity my roof. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no thought, I waited. When I had no father, I made care my father. When I had no mother, I embraced order. When I had no friend, I made quiet my friend. When I had no enemy, I opposed my body. When I had no temple, I made my voice my temple. I have no priest. My tongue is my choir. When I have no means, fortune is my means. When I have nothing, death will be my fortune. Need is my tactic. Detachment is my strategy. When I had no lover, I courted my sleep. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no thought, I waited. We'll finish with another poem that some of you have heard me do before with the musicians, and it too involves the saxophone. The poem is called Ginza Samba, and it contains true facts about the history of the saxophone, which was invented by a Belgian guy living in Paris named Adolphe Sax. And like the history of many things, the history of the saxophone, like the history of almost every human thing, the history of the saxophone involves terrific ingenuity and beauty and creativity and horror and ugliness and enslavement and torture. And they're all mixed up together. It's true if you wrote the family history of anybody here, all those same things would be involved. Why should the saxophone be any different? So we'll finish with this, and I'm going to thank again Todd Coolman. Maestro Pat LaBarbera. Samba. A monosyllabic European named Sax invents a horn. Walla whirlity wah. A kind of twisted brazen clarinet, but with its column of vibrating air shaped not in a cylinder like a clarinet, but in a cone widening forever outward. Bawa. Infinitely outward. Bawa. And spouting infinitely upward through an upturned, swollen golden bell, ringed like a gloxinia flowering in Sax's Belgian imagination and in the unfathomable matrix of mothers and fathers. The unfathomable matrix of mothers and fathers as a genius graven, humming into the cells of the body, or saved, cupped in the resonating grail of memory. The resonating grail of memory, and memory changed and exchanged, as in the trading of brasses, pearls, ivories. Memory changed and exchanged as in the trading of calicos, brasses, pearls, ivories, calicos, and slaves. Slave laborers, slave girls, two cousins in a royal family of Niger known as the Birds or Hawks. Cousins in the royal family of Niger known as the Birds or Hawks. In Christendom, one cousin's child becomes a, quote, favorite Negro, end quote, ennobled by decree of the Tsar. And ennobled by decree of the Tsar, he founds a great family, a line of generals, dandies, and courtiers, including the poet Pushkin. A line of generals, dandies, and courtiers, including the poet Pushkin, killed in a duel concerning his wife's honor. The poet Pushkin killed in a duel concerning his wife's honor, while the other cousin sails in the belly of a slave ship to the port of Baltimore. The other cousin sails in the belly of a slave ship to the port of Baltimore, where she is raped and dies in childbirth. She is raped and dies in childbirth. But the infant will marry a Seminole. And in the next chorus of time, their child fathers a great hawk or bird with many followers, among them this great-grandchild of the Jewish manager of a Pushkin estate, blowing his American breath out into the wiggly tune, uncurling its triplets and sixteenths. She is raped and dies in childbirth, but the infant will marry a Seminole, and in the next chorus of time, their child fathers a great hawk or bird with many followers, among them this great-grandchild of the Jewish manager of a Pushkin estate, blowing his American breath out into the wiggly tune, uncurling its triplets and sixteenths, the Ginza samba of breath and brass, the reed vibrating as a valve, the ether, the unimaginable wires and circuits of ingenious box and circuits here in my room, in this house, built 100 years ago while I was elsewhere. The ingenious circuits in this box, in my room, in this house, built 100 years ago while I was elsewhere. It is like falling in love. The atavistic imperative. It's like falling in love. The atavistic imperative of some one voice or face, the skill, the copper filament, the golden bell full of notes twirling through their invisible element, from Rio to Tokyo, gathering speed in the variations. As they tunnel the haunted labyrinth of stirrup and anvil, echoing here in the hearkening instrument of my skull. Thank you very much. I just want to tell you that a lot of people thought these guys had music in front of them. They had the text of the poems in front of them. And I was so careful this time and numbered everything, blah, 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 and Pat couldn't find the poem to Ginza Samba, but he had done it before, so it worked out okay.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you.